Hello, I am Reverend Irene Smith, and I'd like to welcome you to Generationally Speaking. Here at the table, we come and we discuss life issues, no matter what they might be. As we sit at the table with each generation, we all learn, we all grow, we all are inspired.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Generationally Speaking. Hello, I am Reverend Irene Smith, your host for Generationally Speaking, and I want to welcome you back to the table as we sit together and we learn and we all grow as we hear the journeys of others. I usually have with me my co-hosts, Minister James Durham and Pastor Shamika Latte Oliver. They're not with me today, but trust me, they're very close by. But I am excited about today. And the reason why I want this conversation today has to do with battles. The battle, we often hear the scripture says, the battle is not yours, but it's the Lord. And that's very true. But if you've never been in a battle, you don't know what it means for, like the disciples who were on the ship and the ship was rocking. And they said, Lord, carest thou not? You don't know what it is to be in a battle until maybe you unless you've been like David and faced a giant. But this young man that I have today, he was in a battle, and praise be to God, his faith kept him. So I want you to sit back, get your tea, whatever you're sipping on, and get ready, because his journey will strengthen you. His journey will cement your faith even the more. His journey will say to you, if you're right now going through a trial, let me just hold on. Because one thing about it, God's hand never changes. So let me welcome to Generationally Speaking, Dwight Jefferson. Hello, Mr. Jefferson.
Reverend Smith, good evening. How are you doing today?
I am doing fine. And how are things going? Well, let me just dive right on into this conversation. Since I know I met his parents, his mom, dad, brother. And so I want to first start there. Those early formative years that you spent, I'm hoping, I don't know for sure, but maybe in Tennessee. You never know. People travel so much, they end up one place and you think they've always been there. So tell us about those formative years and what your parents, your mom, your dad, your sibling, what did they instill in you?
So I have two brothers. And as you know, you've met my mom and my dad, and they learned this from their parents, that you always stick together and look out for family. But I think the most important thing, and we talk about this a lot today, you have to trust in God. Mm-hmm. And you rely on God. And I can remember every Sunday as you were going to church. Summer Bible school. I remember, we're marching in to this when the saints go marching in. Yes. My great grandfather was a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor of his own church. I have uncles who are pastors, cousins who are pastors. My brother's a deacon now. My dad is a deacon. So they instill God in us, responsibility, education, and being there for one another, and your word. If you say you're going to do it, then you do it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, in the African American community, so let me just go back and make sure that you spent your early years in Tennessee.
So actually Tennessee, and then my dad was in the military, so we traveled a lot. Okay. Spent 3 years in Germany, learned a lot about the culture there. And what I can say, wherever we went, the African American community, the culture was the same. So it doesn't, we met people who were from various parts of the United States, but the core component of our culture, which is family, God, responsibility, was the same. So that was a great thing, encountering that, because, like I say, we met people from all over, but the Sunday meals, that was in the family gathering together, that was the same no matter what state, what country we lived. So that was awesome for us to experience that. And I didn't realize it then as much as I do now. And I see how some of those components in today's cultures is not as strong as it was then. So I take it upon myself and my wife to make sure that those who are missing or lacking that in their lives, that we provide that for them.
Right. It's interesting that you say that, because in most African American communities, when you talk to individuals from across this United States, you find out that most of them grew up in communities that were somewhat segregated, the African American community, and they all tended to have a barbershop. Everybody got barbershop. They tended to have at least 3 churches. They tended to have a funeral home, and then the local school. And oftentimes it was only one school that went from elementary to high school, or maybe 2 schools. And then they always seem to have their own share of juke joints. I know some of y'all know what I'm talking about, but anyway, for those of you who do. But when you think about, and then, you had those persons in your family who represented to you, you looked at them in a certain way, you looked up to them in a certain way. But when you look back and then your school teachers, who were extremely important as well in the community. But when you look back over your life and you think about those persons that sold into your life, what life lessons did you garner from them?
Oh my gosh, there were so many. It's like, I was fortunate to have known my great grandparents, and again, family, your word, church, the love of God, the family picnics, and the history that was told down about this person, that person in the family. But everybody was always there for one another. My grandmother, always, you check on this person, you check on that person, see how this person is doing. If somebody was in need, you help them. That was what you did. You didn't talk about them. You reached out your hand to help them. Those are things that I remember. My parents still say that was one thing that they admire the most about me, and even their friends and my friends. I'm always willing to lend a helping hand. And that's a gift from God. And it was also nurtured by that long line of people who came before me. And I do the same for others. And when people are like, well, Mr. Jefferson, well, why are you helping me? Because that's what God wants me to do. And when I'm pouring into you, you're going to have a similar opportunity later in life to pour into someone. And I want you to reflect back upon this. And the men in my life taught us how to be men. You don't have that a lot. How to treat a woman, the responsibility of going to work and taking care of your family. Those are the lessons that I remember that I've watched, my uncles, my dad, my grandfather, great grandfather. I watched them do that. My grandfather preached up until he couldn't preach any longer. So did my great grandfather. So I saw that work ethic, which was very important. Again, taking care of your family, which was very important. Education was important. And many of them, I remember, like my grandmother, get your lesson. And if everyone needed help in my family, because I was the teacher, call Dwight. And because that was what was instilled in me, and that was a gift from God, I was able to help people as much as I possibly could. So those are the things that stand out to me the most as I reflect back over my formative years.
You brought up talking about the men in the community, because men in the community always had a way of looking out for the young boys, as they would call them. something called them young bucks, but they had a name for them. But I can remember my brothers as they were maturing, and I remember my brother started walking strange. My mother said, "Boy, what's wrong with your leg?" We cracked up laughing. We like, "There's nothing wrong with his leg, Mama. He getting his walk together."
Yes, yes.
So you had these men who even would pull you aside when they saw you doing something that they know would take you down the wrong path, or pull you aside to encourage you. Did you have any of those men like that in your life?
Yes, my uncles. So we grew up, and well, I won't say grew up, but we spent a lot of time in the projects, and the projects was Lincoln Homes. So we saw guys, black men, who, for whatever reason, had fallen upon hard times in life, dropped out of school. And even though they were on the corner selling dope, they told us, no, this is not for you. If you had somebody in the community like a star athlete, they wrapped around that star athlete to make sure he wasn't out doing something stupid. Same thing with the rest of us, school wise. They didn't want you to skip school. You go to school. You do what you, and you listen to what their teacher tells you. That's what I remember. And my Uncle Cornbread, my dad and my Uncle Linwood, some of their friends, Bobby Harris now is a pastor, Reverend Harris. And you people really can relate to Pastor Harris because they saw Pastor Harris's past. Mm-hmm. So when he talks about how God can change your life and deliver you, he is a walking and living example of that. And people came to his church because of that. And their lives were changed because of that. So Soda Pop, I remember all of those people's names, and we laugh at them now. But I remember that some of these brothers are dying out or have died. But I remember the lessons they taught us how to play basketball, and here, put this ball in your hand and play football. There's no need for you all to fight. If you fought, you put on boxing gloves, and they would teach you how to box. And then that would be the end of it. There was no more, I'm coming back later with a gun or anything like that, because that was not how we grew up.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you say that, because as we journey on sharing, you can see how this really shaped you and allowed you to hold on to your composure and to settle yourself down in some things as you had to navigate and move forward. So now you graduate from high school and you're off to college. Did you matriculate at a HBCU or?
Well, before I went to college, I have a long line of family members who served in the military.
Okay.
So I enlisted in the Air Force while I was in 11th grade. It was called Delayed Enlistment Program. The gentleman, the recruiter, back then, everybody took the ASVAB test. Mm-hmm. So we took the ASVAB test, beginning of my 11th grade year. The recruiter reached out to me and said, you scored well enough for the Air Force. I didn't know what that meant. So I did some research. You have to score the highest on that test to go into the Navy and Air Force. Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, great. My dad, as I said, was in the Army. My granddad was in the Army. My other grandfather was in the Air Force. I have uncles. So again, just a long history, even females in my family in the military. So I joined, didn't have a second thought about it. Spent 4 years in the military. Then I came home, worked in a factory. And my mom and dad kept saying, boy, you're wasting your brain. You need to go to school. You need to go to school. And it's, again, God's going to get what he wants out of you. And like Jonah, God kept telling me, go to school. But I'm working at this factory, fresh out of here. I'm 22 years old. I'm making $12 an hour in 1991, 92. That's a lot of money. Mm-hmm. So, and there was a competition going on at work that time where you didn't miss any days, you got $500 worth of, a $500 bonus. Long story short, something happened that ended and cost me my job. I thought that was the end of the world when that happened, but that was what God needed me to do, to go to college, because I kept putting it off. So because I was laid off, Then I was forced to go to college. Went to college, started June of 1993. Never forget, walked into the African American Culture Center. And in that culture center, this was in the summer, was Shannon Verrett, his wife, and several other African Americans at the university. So I went to Austin P State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. My mom wanted me to go to Fisk or Meharry because she wanted me to be a dentist. But that wasn't my passion. So I went through, they call it non-traditional student. Those are students who, at that time, you didn't go directly to college right out of high school. You were an adult. So fast forward, I met Mary Elaine, but Shannon Verrett, he and I sat down, and because I knew I wanted to be an educator, knew I wanted to be a teacher. We mapped out my entire schedule, coursework for the entire time I was there. And he was like, you can mix and match if you need to. So he was an education major, and so was his wife. So that brother and his wife poured into me, invited me to go to church with them. And I met other people who we're still friends to this day. So that's how my journey started with education. Graduated December 15th, 1995. I graduated college 2.5 years.
Wow.
Went year round.
Wow. That speaks volumes about what was inside of you, you know. And so now you graduate from college. So did you get your first teaching assignment, or was that something that came later?
So, and it's God's pathway. And I didn't realize it then. So I have to tell you all about this. I was in this class called Reading 40/30. And we had to go out and do reading assessments and work with elementary school students who had a reading deficit. And at the end of the semester, you turned in your project. So I had an A in the class. I aced all the tests. That wasn't difficult for me to do. Again, that was something God put into me, a love of learning. I love school. I did not like snow days because snow days meant you could not go to school and learn. During the summer, when teachers would get rid of old worksheets, workbooks, I would gather that and I would teach school to my cousins, to my uncles who were my age, and to neighborhood kids. That's how much I love school. So Dr. Ann Harris, I slid my project underneath her door. The one day that I skipped her class, and I slid my project underneath her door. When the protocol was, you give it to her in class. Had I gone to class, I would have known that she was leaving directly from class that day, not the afternoon sessions, and going out of town. So she didn't get my project until the following week.
Wow.
She marked it late and gave me an F, which brought my grade down to a D. And in your major course, you can't get anything lower than a C. So I was very upset, and I blamed her. But hindsight, I couldn't blame her. It was my mistake. So there were three of us: Pam Rowe, Michael Bates. We had to retake that course, and we retook it, and we sat in front of the class, and we did everything we needed to do. We thought we were getting back at Dr. Harris, but little did we know Dr. Harris was instilling and pouring into us. And those are lessons that I carry with me today about making things on time. So that delayed my teaching assignment. Mm-hmm. But again, it was delayed but not denied because it was on the pathway where God wanted me to be. So I actually started teaching in January of 1996. And they counted that as my first year of teaching. Even though you start mid-year, you have the principal as an option. You know, don't count that time or make you a long-term substitute. And at that school, middle school, predominantly white middle school, very few Black staff members, but we all found one another and we were like a family. We supported one another. Many of them had been in education for at least 15 to 20 years. And as a brand new Black male educator, they poured into me.
Oh. So when you got to school, having as you became a teacher in the school system, and you'd already had the opportunity to somewhat hone your skills with your cousins, but when you got there with students, was your reality uh, the same as what you had thought it was going to be with the dreams that you came in, this how you would reach the students? Was that the same, or was it a different reality for you?
It was better.
Better.
Yes. Kids love being in Mr. J's classroom because they learned, and I wanted to share my love of learning with them. And again, my school system was predominantly white, a school district, but all kids love Mr. J.
Okay.
They wanted to be in my classroom because I was strict, but I taught. I'll never forget my first evaluation with Mr. Bernard, the principal. Back then, when you became a teacher, you may have gone to college for math or science, but you taught wherever the principal told you to teach. That was just that. So I had 4 different preps. I had 8th grade social studies, 8th grade reading, 8th grade science, and I can't remember the 4th one. So Mr. Bernard came in to do teachers that get formally observed. And if you're a brand new teacher, you get more observations than those who are veteran teachers. Right. So it was my very first one of the year, and we were doing a lesson on the various states of gases. I had ice water, I had a coat hanger, and I can't remember what else I had. But we were talking about how atoms and molecules, become from solid to liquid to gas. And I had the ice water outside. It had about 12 glasses. So I'm instructing the kids. We're doing the coat hangers, bending them, because when they bump and when it speeds up and they bump into one another, it gets hot. So after I did the ice water, students were doing their labs. Mr. Bernard leaves out. I'm in a temporary outside. And he goes next door to Rick Martin's classroom, because Rick Martin was responsible for me getting me at this school, because this was my second school. So fast forward, after the observation, Rick comes in, he shakes my hand, gives me a hug. Rick was that type of a person. He's like, my black brother, because he was white. So he was like, Mr. Bernard is just awesome. He asked me, where did you find him? He said, we need more like him. Rick, go find more like him. And when I met with Mr. Bernard, he was like, I was just impressed. He said, I've never seen someone who has 4 preps, whose science wasn't your background, reach kids the way you did. And then when we had our test scores, the district's testing coordinator met with the principal and me. My scores were well above the counties and the states. And I'll never forget her telling him this. And this is the next principal. He didn't like it because he was racist. She said, you need to clone him and put him in every classroom, because whatever he's doing, it works. And at that time, I didn't give God the glory and the honor. I didn't. I should have, but I didn't know any better to do so. But as I look back, it was all because of what he had poured into me, the people he had put into my life. That's the reason why I was so successful.
Wow. So now you end up eventually in Prince George's County school system. And what was that reality for you?
Oh my gosh. So I have to backtrack to when I told my principal that I was leaving to come here, because my wife had an opportunity to work with the White House. And I was coaching at home. I was on the pathway to doing administration. So actually, I wanted to be an athletic director. At that time, I knew I wanted to be a principal, but I was a successful coach, a successful teacher. When I told my students that I was leaving, they cried. Basketball players were upset. So I almost said, no, I'm going to stay here, but I didn't. When I get to Prince George's County and I interview, and they're like, oh, you're going to go to a magnet school with your talent in math. That's where we need you. I'm like, okay, great. Now, I didn't know that much about Prince George's County other than it was predominantly African-American. I could have applied at Fairfax, Montgomery County. My wife actually wanted me to do that because we lived in Virginia. I was like, no, I was like, my people need me. And that's where I'm going to be. When I got there, it was a culture shock. as to how those students treated teachers.
Mhm.
They didn't value education the way I did and the way the students in Tennessee did. And I'm just talking about this one particular school. You know, I never worked in a school where kids cursed you out and threatened you and didn't do. And you have one or two who may not perform, but not to the level that these students were doing. And every day I would call home and I would like talk to my former principal, my friend and my principal, because we started as teachers. And then she became the principal of the school where I started and then went back before I moved here. She was like, Dwight, they just don't know you. And I never, she just as calm as day. Dwight, they don't know you. Once they get to know you, that you love them, you care about them, and you're there to help them, things will change for you. I'm like, Roz, I don't know. She's like, Dwight, you can do it. And little by little, things started to change. Janae, James, T-Von. So I can remember all of them, Kevin, they started to change and they started to come around. And at that time, Maryland was doing the functional test for reading and for math. And at this school, the scores were, I think it was maybe like 2 to 3% of the entire school was passing. And I'm like, no. And I'm like, you know, it hurt my heart that these kids didn't have basic math skills. So, and then when I moved here, the lesson plans were written out for us. I'm like, I'm not accustomed to that. I'm writing my own lesson plans. So fast forward, students are doing much better. The discipline issues calmed down. They knew that Coach Jay cared about them. And I think that's also helped because I became the basketball coach. And we were winning games and people were coming out of the woodworks to Andrew Jackson, seeing these things. Then they realized the talent with math. Then my students started passing those functional math tests. Then Janae went on from math 8 and math 7 to algebra 1. And I'm telling the teacher, this is what you have to do to reach them. And those kids still talk about that to this day. You're the best math teacher that I ever had. I hated math. I was scared of math, but you helped me get over that fear. So that was the culture shock. One, working with a staff that was predominantly Black, a school that was 99% Black, and students not, from my initial interaction with them, not having a love and a passion for learning. And I would tell them how we are Africans. We are the first mathematicians, the first scientists, the first physicians, the first astronomers. We were first in the things that mattered the most and shaped this world. Now we're first in things that don't matter the most and last in things that do. We're going to change that. And I would stand on top of the tables in the media center and I'm preaching to all of the kids. And my colleagues, they still remember that. Jefferson, remember me standing on top of tables and parents coming up, yeah, we want our kids in Mr. Jefferson's class.